The centuries roll backward. The empire breathes again. The thin mountain air carries the scent of wild ichu grass and cold granite, and the ruins that surround this place are not ruins at all, not anymore. These walls of perfectly fitted stone, these terraces cascading down the mountainside like stairways built for giants, these doorways framing snow-capped peaks that pierce a sky so blue it aches. All of it pulses with the memory of a civilization that once commanded 4,000 kilometers of the most extreme landscape on Earth. This is the heart of Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters, and the story that begins here is unlike anything the ancient world has ever seen. Long before the first Sapa Inca walked this valley, the Andes cradled thousands of years of human brilliance. Pyramids rose in the Super Valley 5,000 years ago at Caral, older than the Great Pyramids of Egypt. The Chavin cult spread its jaguar iconography from a temple buried in the mountains. The Moche built monuments from over 130 million adobe bricks. Tiwanaku raised its gateway of the sun beside the sacred waters of Lake Titicaca. And then, around 1,200 years after the Common Era began, a small group settled here in the Cusco Valley, carrying stories of a golden staff and a journey from the island of the sun. From those mythic beginnings, the Inca would build the largest empire the Americas had ever known. Over the course of this complete journey, every chapter of that extraordinary story will unfold. It begins in the deep past, among the ancient civilizations that laid the foundations, and follows the Inca from their humble origins through the explosive conquests of Pachacuti, the earth-shaker, who rebuilt this very city in the shape of a puma and raised the fortress of Sacsayhuamán with stones weighing more than 100 tons. It traces the roads, over 30,000 kilometers of them, that stitched an empire together across deserts, mountains, and cloud forests. It reveals how 12 million people were governed without a single written word, using only knotted cords of dyed cotton and camelid fiber. It walks through the daily lives of farmers, weavers, and goldsmiths, and ascends to the frozen summits where children were offered to the gods. And then it follows the fracture, the civil war between two brothers, the arrival of fewer than 200 Spanish soldiers, and the single afternoon at Cajamarca that shattered an empire forever. The resistance that followed, the jungle stronghold of Vilcabamba, the final execution in this city's central plaza, all of it will be told. And beyond the fall, the legacy that refused to die, a language still spoken by millions, terraces still feeding communities, a bridge of woven grass rebuilt each year by the same hands that have always rebuilt it. This is not simply a history lesson. This is a complete journey through time, from the first stone laid to the last echo of an empire that conquered the sky itself. Some of the greatest mysteries of human engineering and ambition are carved into these walls. By the end, the full arc of this civilization will be clear, not just what happened, but how a people rose from a single valley to reshape an entire continent, and why their memory still burns with power today. If these complete journeys through ancient civilizations speak to something deep within, please subscribe so the next exploration is never missed. Each week, the full story of a lost world is brought back to life. Now let us begin our journey at the very beginning, thousands of years before the Inca, when the first pyramids rose from the desert floor and the Andes first whispered of empires yet to come. A strip of desert runs along the western edge of South America, one of the driest places on Earth, pressed between the Pacific Ocean and the highest mountain chain in the Western Hemisphere. The Andes rise from sea level to nearly 7,000 meters in a matter of kilometers, their snow-capped peaks giving way to highland plateaus where the air thins and the sky burns a deep cobalt blue. East of the summits, cloud forests cascade into the Amazon basin, a world of green darkness and perpetual rain. This is the theater where civilization takes root, not in a single valley or along a single river, but across vertical worlds stacked one upon another, each with its own climate, its own gifts, its own dangers. Around 3,000 years before the Common Era, in the arid Super Valley roughly 200 kilometers north of modern Lima, something extraordinary emerges. Corral rises from the desert floor, 6 stone platform mounds, the largest standing nearly 18 meters high, arranged around sunken circular plazas lined with fitted stone. No pottery has been found here, no evidence of warfare. Yet the scale of construction demands organized labor numbering in the thousands. Cotton nets hauled anchovies from the Pacific. Flutes carved from condor and pelican bone sound across the plazas. Corral stands contemporary with the Great Pyramids of Egypt, making it the oldest known urban center in the Americas. 2,000 years pass. In the northern highlands, at an elevation of 3,177 meters, the temple complex of Chavin de Huántar channels water through hidden underground galleries, producing a roar that reverberates through stone corridors. Deep inside the oldest structure, the Lanzon monolith stands, a blade-shaped granite pillar 4.5 meters tall, carved with the image of a fanged deity whose hair writhes with serpents. Jaguar iconography radiates outward from this site after 900 years before the Common Era, spreading across the highlands and coast in what scholars call the Chavin Horizon, a unifying religious phenomenon binding distant communities through shared symbols and pilgrimage. Far to the south, on the bone-dry Nazca Pampa, enormous geoglyphs stretch across the desert. A hummingbird spanning nearly 70 meters, a spider, a monkey with a spiraling tail. Etched by removing dark surface stones to reveal lighter ground beneath, these figures endure for centuries in the rainless air, visible only from great height, their purpose still debated but almost certainly tied to water rituals and celestial observation. On the north coast, the Mocha civilization flourishes between roughly 100 and 700 years of the Common Era. The Huasa del Sol rises from the desert, a stepped adobe platform built from over 130 million sun-dried bricks, the largest adobe structure in the Americas. Nearby, the walls of the Huaca de la Luna blaze with polychromatic murals depicting a fanged deity surrounded by scenes of ritual combat, the capture of prisoners, and ceremonial blood offerings. Moche artisans produce portrait head vessels of such individuality that specific human faces stare back across 15 centuries. Rulers, warriors, the blind, the scarred. Their metallurgists master gilding techniques that will not be independently developed in Europe for centuries. Each of these civilizations rises, transforms, and eventually fades. But nothing is lost entirely. Technologies accumulate, irrigation systems grow more sophisticated, textile traditions deepen, religious iconography evolves but retains echoes of Chavin's fanged gods. The Andes remember everything, storing knowledge not in written scripts but in architecture, in fiber, in the terraced reshaping of the mountains themselves. The land waits, holding the memory of pyramids and jaguars, of desert lines and painted temples, for the next great power to gather these threads together. At 3,800 meters above sea level, where the air thins and the altiplano stretches in every direction like a frozen inland sea, a city rises beside the sacred waters of Lake Titicaca. Tiwanaku emerges slowly across the 5th and 6th centuries of the Common Era, its builders shaping andesite and sandstone into monuments of startling geometric precision. The Akapana pyramid climbs in 7 terraced steps, its interior honeycombed with stone channels designed to carry rainwater downward through the structure in a cascade that transforms the entire edifice into a man-made mountain weeping sacred water. Beside it, the semi-subterranean temple sinks into the earth, its walls studded with carved stone heads, faces of conquered peoples or ancestor spirits gazing inward from the walls of a sunken court. The gateway of the sun stands carved from a single block of andesite, its central figure radiating lines that terminate in condor and puma heads. This staff god, echoing imagery stretching back to Chavin, presides over a cosmological program that Tiwanaku's priests carry outward across the southern Andes. Tiwanaku's influence reaches the Chilean coast, the Cochabamba Valley, and the Atacama Desert, not primarily through military conquest, but through colonies, trade networks, and the spread of a powerful religious ideology. Llama caravans move goods across hundreds of kilometers of high plateau, connecting communities bound by shared ritual and reciprocal obligation. 500 kilometers to the northwest, near modern Ayacucho, a parallel power consolidates. The Wari state builds something the Andes have not seen before, a true administrative empire with standardized architecture replicated across vast distances. At Piquilacta, in the highlands southeast of the future Cusco, the Wari construct a massive rectangular compound, over 700 structures arranged in rigid grids behind high perimeter walls. The compound's D-shaped ceremonial buildings, its storage facilities, its regimented layout all speak of centralized planning imposed upon local populations. The Wari build roads connecting their provincial centers, establishing way stations that prefigure the Tambo system a later empire will perfect. Their administrative compounds appear from Cajamarca in the north to the Moquegua Valley in the south. Around the year 1000, both Tiwanaku and Wari collapse. Prolonged drought devastates the Altiplano. Political fragmentation follows. The Andes enter a period of competing regional kingdoms, the so-called Late Intermediate period, when no single power commands the highlands or the coast. Then, on the arid north coast of Peru, the Chimú kingdom rises from the legacy of the earlier Moche. By the 12th century, the Chimú begin constructing Chan Chan in the Moche Valley, a city that will eventually sprawl across approximately 20 square kilometers, making it the largest adobe city ever built. 9 or 10 great ciudadelas, walled royal compounds, dominate the urban core, each one a palace, administrative center, and eventual mausoleum for a single Chimú king. Their walls rise 10 meters high, decorated with intricate adobe friezes depicting waves, fish, seabirds, and geometric patterns pressed into wet clay. Narrow corridors lead through labyrinthine passages into audience halls, storage rooms holding spondylus shell and fine textiles, and walk-in wells tapping the water table. The Chimu govern through a bureaucratic hierarchy that administers irrigation canals stretching over 80 kilometers, channeling water from the Chicama River into the Moche Valley. Their goldsmiths produce ceremonial tume knives, ear spools, and pectoral ornaments of hammered gold with a sophistication that will make them prized captives when conquest finally comes. At its peak, Chan Chan houses an estimated 30,000 people, the capital of a coastal empire stretching over 1,000 kilometers. These three civilizations, Tiwanaku with its religious authority and colonial networks, Wari with its administrative grids and road systems, Chimu with its bureaucratic governance and urban scale, each solve fundamental problems of Andean statecraft. How to move goods across impossible terrain, how to organize labor across diverse ecological zones, how to project power without written language. Their solutions accumulate in the Andean memory like sediment layering into stone, waiting for a small kingdom in the Cusco Valley to inherit them all. Lake Titicaca sprawls across the Altiplano at 3,800 meters, the highest navigable body of water in the world, its surface so vast it generates its own weather. Near its southern shore, the island of the sun rises from water the color of lapis lazuli, its terraced slopes catching the first light of dawn. It is from this island, according to one of the most enduring origin narratives in the Americas, that the founder of the Inca dynasty emerges. Manco Capac and his consort Mama Oclo step forth as children of Inti, the sun god himself, sent to bring order and civilization to a world living in darkness. They carry a golden staff with instructions to walk the earth until it sinks effortlessly into the soil, marking the place where they must build their kingdom. A second tradition tells a different story with the same destination. At Pacaritambo, roughly 30 kilometers south of the Cusco Valley, 3 cave mouths open in a rocky hillside called Tampu Toko. From the central cave emerge 4 brothers, the Aya siblings, and their 4 sister wives, accompanied by 10 Alas, the kinship groups that form the bedrock of Andean social organization. The journey northward is long and marked by transformation. One brother is sealed inside a cave. Another sprouts wings and flies to Cusco, turning to stone on the hill of Huanacauri, which becomes one of the most sacred huacas in Inca religion. A third is likewise petrified. Only Aya Manco Capac by another name, reaches the Cusco Valley with the founding families. These are not competing myths, but complementary ones, encoding in narrative form what archaeology confirms as a migration. Sometime around 1200 of the Common Era, a small ethnic group settles in the Huatanay River basin, a fertile valley cradled between mountain ridges at approximately 3,400 meters elevation. The valley offers everything a highland community needs: a reliable water source, arable land for maize and potatoes, surrounding slopes for grazing camelid herds, and defensible high ground on every side. The early settlement is modest. Stone foundations, later buried beneath grander Inca construction, reveal rectangular enclosures arranged around central courtyards, the cancha architectural form that will define Inca building for centuries. The community organizes itself through the Ailu, the extended kinship network that governs land distribution, labor obligations, and reciprocal exchange. Each Ailu holds collective rights to agricultural plots distributed across different altitudes, the vertical archipelago strategy perfected over millennia of Andean habitation. Manco Capac, whether historical figure or mythic compression of generations, is remembered as the first Sapa Inca, the sole ruler. He establishes the foundational division that will shape Cusco's identity throughout its existence. Hanan Cusco, the upper moiety, and Hurin Cusco, the lower. This dual organization mirrors a principle woven deep into Andean thought, the complementary opposition of high and low, male and female, sun and moon. The first 8 rulers of the dynasty belong to the Hurin lineage, governing a community that remains for generations a small chiefdom among many in the valley, surrounded by rival ethnic groups, the Ayamaca, the Penagua, the Muina, each contesting the same fertile land. The Cusco Valley in the 13th century is no empty stage awaiting its protagonists. It is a crowded landscape of competing communities, each with its own huacas, its own ancestral claims, its own alliances. The early Inca hold no obvious advantage. Their territory is limited, their population small, their military strength unremarkable. What distinguishes them, perhaps, is the power of their origin story itself, the claim of solar descent, the divine mandate carried in a golden staff that sinks into the earth precisely here, in this valley, at this altitude, beneath these particular stars. It is a claim that will take 2 centuries to fulfill, but the foundation stones are laid, both in the ground and in the collective memory of a people who believe themselves chosen by the sun. The valley floor in the early 14th century is a mosaic of irrigated terraces and stone-walled compounds, each ailu tending its own fields of maize and potato along the banks of the Huatanay River. Smoke rises from cancha enclosures, rectangular rooms arranged around central courtyards, their walls of rough fieldstone mortared with mud, their roofs thatched with ichu grass. This is the architecture of a chiefdom, not an empire. The Inca are one group among many, and the Cusco Basin belongs to no single power. Sinchi, the second Sapa Inca, consolidates what Manco Capac claimed. His reign is remembered not for conquest but for ceremony, the introduction of the huarachicui, the male initiation rite that will endure for centuries, piercing the ears of young nobles to mark their passage into adulthood. The elongated earlobes of the Inca elite, later noted with astonishment by Spanish chroniclers, begin here, in this quiet assertion of cultural identity. Yoke Yupanqui and Meta Capac extend alliances through marriage rather than warfare, binding neighboring islas into a web of kinship obligations. The Inca grow not by overwhelming their rivals, but by absorbing them. Yet the valley is contested ground. The Ayamaca control territory to the northwest and resist Inca encroachment with stubborn ferocity. The Penagua and the Muina press from the south and east. Skirmishes flare along boundary lines marked by irrigation canals and sacred stones. Capac Yupanqui pushes Inca influence modestly outward, but the gains remain fragile, measured in fields and water rights rather than provinces. The transition from Hurin Cusco to Hanan Cusco marks a profound shift. Inca Roca, the sixth Sapa Inca, establishes the upper moiety's dominance, relocating the seat of power to the higher ground of the valley. Under his rule, the Sacsayhuamán, a house of learning for the sons of nobility, takes shape, training future administrators in Quipu reading, history, and the Quechua language that will one day unify a continent of disparate tongues. Stone-lined water channels grow more sophisticated, directing snowmelt from the Vilcanota peaks into reservoirs that sustain the growing population through the dry months. Yahuar Huacac, whose name means He who weeps blood inherits a kingdom shadowed by internal tension and external pressure. Oral histories preserved by later chroniclers describe his reign as troubled, marked by omens and political instability. The Inca position remains precarious, powerful enough to provoke jealousy, not yet strong enough to command obedience. It is Viracocha Inca, the eighth ruler, who first reaches beyond the Cusco basin with genuine ambition. His campaigns push northwest toward Calca and northeast into the upper Urubamba Valley, claiming fertile bottomland where maize grows thick in the warmer microclimate. He builds a palace at Sacsayhuamán and forges alliances with groups as far as the Titicaca Basin, invoking the creator god whose name he bears. For the first time, the Inca project power across multiple valleys. But from the Apurimac region to the northwest, a storm gathers. The Chanca Confederation, a coalition of warlike peoples centered around Andahuaylas, has been expanding steadily, absorbing smaller groups and building an army that dwarfs anything the Cusco Valley has seen. By the 1430s, Chanca raiding parties probe Inca territory. The threat is existential. The Chanca do not seek alliance or tribute. They seek dominance over the entire central highlands. Viracocha Inca, aging and cautious, weighs his options from the palace at Sacsayhuamán. The irrigated fields of the valley shimmer in the thin highland light. The cancha compounds cluster along the river. The peaks of the Vilcanota Range stand white against a sky of impossible blue. 2 centuries of patient alliance building, strategic marriage, and incremental expansion have brought the Inca to this threshold, a regional power with growing ambitions but untested against a truly formidable enemy. Everything the early Sapa Incas constructed, every canal and courtyard and carefully negotiated bond of kinship, now hangs in the balance as the Chanca armies mass beyond the mountain passes. The Chanca come down from the northwest in a tide of war paint and fury, their ranks swollen with warriors from the Andahuaylas region, their reputation built on a generation of aggressive expansion across the Apurimac drainage. They advance on Cusco around 1438 of the Common Era, and the response from the aging Viracocha Inca is retreat. He withdraws from the capital to his estate at Sacsayhuamán in the Urubamba Valley, taking his designated heir Inca Urco with him. The city stands exposed, but one of Viracocha's sons refuses to flee. Yupanqui, young and untested in command, gathers what forces remain: loyal captains, warriors from allied Ailus, men who understand that the fall of Cusco means the end of everything their ancestors built across 2 centuries. The battle unfolds on the plains outside the city, and it is savage. The Chanca press forward with slings and bronze-headed maces. Yupanqui holds the line, then drives them back. The victory is so total, so unexpected, that it passes immediately into sacred memory. The chronicles record that the Pururaucas, the very stones of the battlefield, rose up and transformed into warriors to fight alongside the Inca. Whether this encodes the arrival of unexpected reinforcements or the sheer disbelief at what one prince accomplished against overwhelming odds, the meaning is the same. The world has shifted on its axis. Yupanqui deposes his father. He sets aside Inca Urco. He takes the imperial fringe, the Mascapaicha, and with it a new name, Pachacuti Inca Yupanqui. The name itself is a declaration. Pachacuti means the overturning of the earth, the reversal of space and time, a cataclysm that remakes the world. and remaking is precisely what follows. Cusco is demolished and rebuilt from its foundations. The new city takes the shape of a puma when seen from the surrounding heights. The body stretches between two canalized rivers, the Tulumayu and the Huatanay, which are straightened and lined with stone to form the animal's flanks. The great plaza of Huaycaypata occupies the belly. The residential districts of the royal Panacas filled the torso, and the head of the puma is Sacsayhuamán. The fortress rises on the hill above the city, and its construction defies casual understanding. 3 massive terrace walls zigzag across the hillside, each built from enormous limestone and andesite blocks. The largest stones weigh over 100 tons. They are quarried, transported, and fitted together without mortar, their surfaces ground so precisely that no blade can penetrate the joints. An estimated 20,000 laborers work on the project under the mitre system, rotating in from communities across the growing empire. The zigzag design is not decorative but defensive. Each angle creates a killing zone where attackers are exposed to fire from multiple directions. Below Sacsayhuamán, the Coricancha undergoes its own transformation. The Temple of the Sun is rebuilt in the finest polygonal masonry the Inca will ever produce, its curved retaining wall following the natural contour of the bedrock, with a precision that will survive every earthquake Cusco endures across the coming centuries. The interior walls receive sheets of hammered gold. A golden sun disk catches the light of the June solstice. A garden of gold and silver replicas, maize stalks with golden ears, silver llamas standing in golden grass, fills the courtyard. Pachacuti does not merely build. He reorganizes the cosmos. The Seca system begins to take shape, sacred lines radiating outward from the Coricancha to connect hundreds of huacas across the landscape. He codifies the state religion, elevating Inti above all other deities. He restructures the administration, imposing the decimal hierarchy that will govern millions. He initiates campaigns of conquest in every direction, pushing into the Titicaca Basin, subduing the Colla and the Lupaca, extending Inca authority farther than any predecessor imagined possible. The valley that nearly fell to the Chanca becomes the center of a new world. The red-walled streets of Cusco fill with the sound of construction, stone being dressed, channels being cut, terraces rising along every hillside. The Puma city takes its shape against the white peaks of the Vilcanota, and from its heart radiates an ambition that will not stop at the horizon. The ambition radiating from Cusco does not remain confined within the Puma city's walls. It spills northward, following the Vilcanota River as it descends through a valley so fertile, so perfectly sheltered between snow-crowned ridges, that the Inca call it the Sacred Valley. Here, between 1450 and 1471 of the Common Era, Pachacuti unleashes a building campaign that transforms the entire river corridor into an interconnected chain of royal estates, agricultural laboratories, and ceremonial complexes of staggering precision. Ollantaytambo rises where the Patacancha stream meets the Urubamba River, its terraces climbing the mountainside in enormous steps of fitted andesite. The lower town preserves the original Inca grid, a rare survival, its trapezoidal doorways opening onto narrow water channels that still carry glacial meltwater through stone-lined courses. But the true marvel stands at the summit of the terrace complex. 6 colossal slabs of rose-colored rhyolite, each standing nearly 4 meters tall, are fitted together with narrow spacer stones of surgical precision. These monoliths originate at the Cachacata Quarry, 6 kilometers away on the opposite side of the valley and hundreds of meters above the river. Teams of laborers drag them down the mountainside, across the river, a crossing requiring temporary dams or massive log ramps, and then up the steep terraces to their final position. The logistics alone demand a level of coordinated labor that rivals anything in the ancient world. Southeast along the valley, Pisac commands a ridgeline above the Vilcanota. Its agricultural terraces curve with the natural contour of the hillside in graceful arcs, their retaining walls slightly inclined to resist the pressure of saturated soil during the rainy season. At the summit, an Intihuatana stone, a carved granite pillar used to track the sun's movement through the solstices, stands in a ceremonial precinct surrounded by fine masonry. Below the citadel, carved into the cliff face, thousands of burial niches honeycomb the rock, the tombs of nobles whose mummified remains once watched over the valley. But it is farther downstream, where the valley narrows and the cloud forest begins its ascent, that Pachacuti's most extraordinary creation takes shape. On a saddle ridge at 2,430 meters, suspended between the peaks of Machu Picchu Mountain and Huayna Picchu, a royal estate emerges from the living granite. Approximately 200 structures rise in careful harmony with the terrain. Temples, residences, storehouses, and fountains arranged along a central axis that separates the agricultural sector from the urban core. The Temple of the Sun features a curved wall of such exquisite masonry that each stone follows the arc without deviation, its window aligned to catch the first light of the June solstice. The room of the 3 windows frames the eastern mountains in trapezoidal openings of deep symbolic resonance. The Intihuatana stone, carved from a single outcrop at the highest point of the urban sector, casts shadows that mark the passage of equinoxes. Beneath the visible beauty lies invisible engineering of extraordinary sophistication. 129 drainage channels honeycomb the site, carrying rainwater away from foundations and terraces. Without this hidden infrastructure, the entire complex, built on a steep ridge receiving nearly 2,000 millimeters of annual rainfall, would slide into the Urubamba Gorge within decades. The foundations extend deep into prepared subsoil, with layers of gravel and sand providing stability on the fractured granite bedrock. These sites are not isolated monuments. They form a connected network of royal estates linked by paved roads, each serving as a retreat where the Sapa Inca can perform rituals, host feasts, and manage agricultural production across multiple ecological zones. The terraces at Ollantaytambo grow maize at altitudes that would normally forbid it, their stone walls absorbing solar heat during the day and releasing it at night, creating microclimates several degrees warmer than the surrounding air. The sacred valley becomes a corridor of engineered abundance, a landscape reshaped so thoroughly that the boundary between nature and architecture dissolves entirely. Every river is channeled, every hillside terraced, every ridgeline crowned with stone that fits as though it grew there. From the engineered abundance of the sacred valley, Pachacuti turns his attention to a problem no wall or terrace can solve. The empire is growing faster than any single ruler can see, faster than any messenger can run. Conquered peoples speak dozens of languages, worship unfamiliar gods, farm landscapes ranging from coastal desert to tropical jungle. What holds such a realm together is not stone, but system, and in the 1460s, the system takes its final extraordinary form. Tawantinsuyu, the land of the four quarters. The name itself is a blueprint. Cusco sits at the center, the navel of the world, and from it 4 great divisions radiate outward like the arms of a cross. Chinchaysuyu reaches northwest toward Ecuador. Antisuyu stretches northeast into the Amazon's green edge. Collasuyu extends southeast across the Altiplano toward Bolivia and beyond. Kuntisuyu spreads southwest toward the Pacific coast. Every village, every valley, every subject, people belongs to one of these quarters, and every quarter answers to a governor of royal blood seated in Cusco. Inside the capital, the Coricancha anchors something even more intricate. 41 invisible lines called siques radiate outward from the temple's golden walls, each line connecting a sequence of huasas, sacred springs, unusually shaped boulders, ancient trees, mountain summits, the places where the landscape breathes with spiritual power. More than 300 huacas are mapped along these lines, and each is assigned to a specific ailu, responsible for its maintenance and ritual care. The Seke system is simultaneously a sacred calendar, a property map, and a social register, binding religious obligation to political order with seamless precision. The gold-sheathed interior of the Coricancha gleams in the highland sun. A massive golden disk representing Inti catches the morning light and throws it across walls lined with sheets of hammered gold. In the temple garden, life-sized replicas of maize stalks, llamas, and flowers stand crafted entirely from gold and silver, each ear of corn individually detailed, each metal leaf catching the wind as though alive. Beyond the sacred geometry, the practical machinery of empire operates through the decimal system. Populations are organized into units of 10 households, 50, 100, 500, 1,000, 5,000, and 10,000, each level overseen by a curaca, a local leader confirmed by the state. Information flows upward through this hierarchy on quipa cords, knotted strings of dyed cotton, and camelid fiber that encode census figures, tribute tallies, and storehouse inventories with mathematical precision. The Mita labor tax transforms this information into action. Every household owes a portion of its labor to the state, not in currency, which does not exist, but in time. Men build roads, terrace hillsides, serve in armies. Women weave textiles for state redistribution. In return, the state guarantees subsistence. Hillside kolkha storehouses, built with ventilation channels cut into stone foundations to preserve their contents, hold vast reserves of freeze-dried chuño potatoes, charqui-dried meat, and maize. These stores buffer the empire against famine, fund military campaigns, and supply the feasts through which the Sapa Inca binds loyalty. No market economy exists, no merchant class emerges. Instead, goods flow through state channels, coastal fish traded for highland wool, jungle coca leaves exchanged for altiplano quinoa, all managed by administrators reading quipu and dispatching orders along the road network. The vertical archipelago strategy, perfected over centuries, now operates at continental scale, each ecological zone contributing its unique resources to a centralized redistribution network of staggering complexity. By the time Pachacuti's reign approaches its end around 1471, Tawantinsuyu is not merely a territory held by force. It is an integrated system where sacred geography, labor obligation, information technology, and ecological management interlock like the polygonal stones of its walls. The empire governs without writing, without money, without wheels, yet administers millions across 4,000 kilometers of the most difficult terrain on Earth. The framework is complete. What it needs now is a conqueror's son willing to carry it to the edges of the known world. That conqueror's son is already battle-tested before he ever takes the throne. Tupac Inca Yupanqui commands armies in his father's name during the final years of Pachacuti's reign, and his first great target lies far to the northwest along the Pacific coast, where the Himu kingdom rules from the largest adobe city on Earth. Chan Chan sprawls across nearly 20 square kilometers of coastal desert near the mouth of the Moche River. Its ciudadelas rise in labyrinthine compounds of sun-dried brick, their walls carved with repeating friezes of fish, seabirds, and ocean waves. The Chimu command an irrigation network feeding hundreds of thousands of subjects. Their goldsmiths produce work of breathtaking refinement, ceremonial tumi knives with crescent blades, ear spools inlaid with turquoise, funerary masks hammered from single sheets of gold so thin they tremble in the slightest breeze. This is no minor chiefdom. The Chimu kingdom is the second largest polity in South America, and it does not intend to kneel. Yet Tupac Inca Yupanqui understands that Chan Chan's power depends on water. Inca forces move to cut the irrigation canals feeding the coastal capital from highland sources. Deprived of the rivers that sustain its agriculture, the Chimu kingdom capitulates around 1470. The conquest is strategic rather than purely martial, a demonstration of the hydraulic intelligence the Inca have cultivated for generations. Chan Chan's master goldsmiths and silversmiths are relocated to Cusco, where their techniques fuse with highland metallurgical traditions to produce some of the finest metalwork the Americas have ever seen. With the north coast secured, Tupac Inca Yupanqui turns south. Inca armies descend onto the Bolivian Altiplano, absorbing the Aymara kingdoms around Lake Titicaca and pressing into the arid valleys of northwestern Argentina. The road pushes deeper still into the Atacama Desert of northern Chile, where the driest landscape on the planet yields copper and precious minerals. Columns of soldiers and administrators march along newly constructed segments of the Capac Ñan, the road surface shifting from fitted stone in the highlands to packed earth marked with wooden posts across the desert floor. The southern frontier eventually reaches the Mol River in central Chile, where fierce Mapuche resistance halts the advance and establishes a boundary the empire will never cross. Simultaneously, campaigns drive northward into the territories of modern Ecuador. The Cañari people resist with determination, but Tupac Inca Yupanqui subdues them and begins constructing Tomebamba near present-day Cuenca. This northern capital grows into a city of fine Inca stonework, rivaling Cusco itself, its temples and plazas reflecting imperial ambition projected across thousands of kilometers. The fortress complex of Ingapirca, with its distinctive elliptical sun temple built atop Cañari foundations, stands as a monument to the merging of conquered and conquering traditions. Oral traditions preserved by later Spanish chroniclers record something extraordinary from this reign. A maritime expedition launched westward into the Pacific on balsa wood rafts. Whether these voyages reached distant islands remains debated, but the ambition they represent is consistent with a ruler who pushes boundaries in every direction simultaneously. By the time Tupac Inca Yupanqui's reign concludes around 1493, Tawantinsuyu encompasses roughly 2.5 million square kilometers. The empire stretches from the equatorial forests of southern Colombia to the temperate river valleys of central Chile, from the Pacific coast to the eastern slopes where the Andes dissolve into Amazonian jungle. Populations numbering in the millions fall under the administration of the decimal system, their labor organized through the mit-ar, their harvests stored in hillside kolka, their identities recorded on quipu cords carried by runners along roads that now bind a continent. The conqueror's son has more than doubled what his father built, and the throne passes onward to a grandson who will carry the empire to its absolute zenith and unknowingly toward the catastrophe waiting just beyond the horizon. The empire that now stretches across a continent faces a problem older than any dynasty. Mountains rise 5,000 meters into thin air, their flanks slashed by gorges so deep that rivers at their bottoms are barely audible from the rim. Coastal deserts extend for hundreds of kilometers without a single source of water. Cloud forests choke every eastern slope in a tangle of moss and root. No wheeled vehicle exists in the Americas. No draft horse pulls a cart along any trail. And yet Tawantinsuyu must move, must carry armies, tribute, information, and authority across 4,000 kilometers of the most punishing terrain on Earth. The answer is the Chapak Nyan, the royal road, and it is not one road, but two. The highland trunk runs along the spine of the Andes from Quito to beyond the Maule River, climbing over passes above 4,000 meters, descending into temperate valleys, ascending again. The coastal trunk parallels it along the Pacific lowlands, cutting straight across desert plains where wooden posts mark the route through featureless sand. Lateral roads connect the two trunks like rungs on a ladder, plunging from highland to coast through every major river valley. Together they form a network exceeding 30,000 kilometers, binding the four Suyus into a single functioning organism. The engineering adapts to every landscape it encounters. In the highlands, roads are paved with fitted stone slabs, their surfaces cambered to shed rain, their edges defined by low walls. Where the route meets a mountainside too steep for grading, stairways are carved directly into living rock, each step worn smooth by the sandaled feet of soldiers, porters, and administrators. In the desert stretches, the road becomes a cleared corridor, its borders lined with low adobe walls or rows of posts, sometimes running perfectly straight for dozens of kilometers across the pampa. Along the eastern slopes, where rainfall is relentless, drainage channels run beneath the roadbed, and retaining walls prevent the jungle from reclaiming the path within a single season. The gorges demand the most extraordinary solution. Rope suspension bridges span chasms that no stone arch could cross. The Queswachaka Bridge over the Apurimac River hangs from cables braided from ichu grass, each cable as thick as a human torso, anchored to stone abutments on either side. The bridge sways underfoot, the river roaring far below. Communities on both banks bear the mitre obligation of rebuilding it annually, replacing every cord, every handrail, every woven floor plank in a ceremony that has continued without interruption for more than 5 centuries. Every 20 to 30 kilometers along the road, a tambo provides shelter, food, and supplies. These way stations range from simple stone enclosures with a few storerooms to elaborate complexes with barracks, kitchens, and kolka warehouses stocked with dried meat, chunyo freeze-dried potatoes, and sandals woven from plant fiber. An army on the march need carry almost nothing: The road feeds it, and the road speaks. The chasqui system stations relay runners at small posts visible to one another along the route. Each chasqui waits, watching the road, a conch-shell trumpet ready to announce his approach to the next runner. When a message arrives, encoded on a quipu or memorized as a verbal account, the chasqui sprints to the next post, where a fresh runner takes the message and continues without pause. The system moves information at speeds reaching 240 kilometers per day. Fresh fish from the Pacific coast arrives in Cusco, still edible, within 2 days of being caught. A military order issued at dawn reaches a garrison hundreds of kilometers away before the following sunset. The Capac Ñan is not merely infrastructure. It is the circulatory system of an empire that possesses no writing, no currency, no wheeled transport. Every thread of authority, every grain of redistributed maize, every knotted cord of census data travels along these paths. Without the road, Tawantinsuyu is only a collection of valleys. With it, the land of 4 quarters breathes as one. The empire breathes as one, but its breath is drawn northward. When Tupac Inca Yupanqui dies around 1493, his son Huayna Capac inherits a domain stretching 4,000 kilometers along the Andean spine. He is perhaps 12 years old. The regency that governs in his name keeps the machinery of Tawantinsuyu turning, the storehouses filled, the roads maintained, the Mita labor rotations enforced, until the young Sapa Inca comes of age and turns his gaze toward the one frontier his father left unfinished. The northern territories resist with a ferocity unlike anything the empire has encountered. The peoples of modern Ecuador, the Cayambe, the Caranqui, the Pasto, fight from fortified hilltop positions surrounded by deep ditches. They know the terrain intimately, cloud forests where mist swallows armies whole, volcanic highlands where the earth itself steams and trembles. Huayna Capac commits enormous resources to these campaigns, personally leading forces through landscapes of moss-draped trees and vertical ravines. The wars drag on for years, perhaps more than a decade. At Yahuacocha, the lake whose name means Lake of Blood, a final decisive battle ends Cayambe resistance at a cost so staggering that the lake reportedly turns red with the dead. Victory transforms the northern provinces. Huayna Capac expands Tomebamba near modern Cuenca in Ecuador into a city of fine-cut stone that rivals Cusco itself. Temples, plazas, and royal compounds rise at 2,500 meters elevation, their walls fitted with the same impossible precision found in the imperial capital. He stations garrisons, builds tambos, extends the Capac Ñan deep into conquered territory. Populations are reshuffled through the Mitmac system, loyal colonists transplanted into restive regions, defeated peoples relocated far from their homelands. The empire reaches its maximum extent from the Ancasmayo River in southern Colombia to the Maule River in central Chile, governing roughly 12 million souls. But Huayna Capac lingers in the north. Cusco, the sacred navel of the world, sees its Sapa Inca less and less. A second court crystallizes around Quito, where Huayna Capac's favored son Atahualpa grows up among the battle-hardened northern generals. In Cusco, another son Huascar, born of the primary royal lineage, waits. 2 centers of gravity now pull at the empire from opposite ends. The administrative genius of Tawantinsuyu, designed to radiate from a single point, strains under the weight of dual allegiance. Then something invisible crosses the continent. Around 1525, a disease never before encountered in the Americas begins moving through indigenous trade networks from the Caribbean basin southward. It is almost certainly smallpox. It travels faster than any chasqui runner, leaping from village to village along the very roads that hold the empire together. Entire communities collapse. The population, with no immunity to old-world pathogens, dies in catastrophic numbers. The epidemic reaches the northern provinces where Huayna Capac holds court. The Sapa Inca himself falls ill. His skin erupts with lesions. His designated heir, Ninan Cuyochi, sickens as well. Around 1527, both are dead. The oracle is consulted, the divinations performed, but the results are ambiguous, contradictory. No clear succession emerges. The empire that has never known a written law of succession, relying instead on the reigning Sapa Incas designation, confirmed by priestly approval, now faces the unthinkable, a vacuum at its center. Tomebamba's fine stonework stands silent. The storehouses along the Capacñan remain full, but the hand that directed their distribution is gone. In Quito, Atahualpa commands the loyalty of the empire's most experienced armies. In Cusco, Huasca claims the throne by right of lineage and the support of the capital's nobility. The road system that once unified 4,000 kilometers of mountain and desert now connects two rival courts, each convinced of its own legitimacy. The empire has reached its greatest territorial extent at the precise moment its political center has shattered. Tawantinsuyu stands at the apex of its power and at the edge of its destruction, and the disease that killed its ruler is only the first wave of a catastrophe still approaching from beyond the sea. The fracture begins almost immediately. Two courts, two armies, two sons of the same dead emperor, and between them 4,000 kilometers of road that no longer carry unity but war. Huasca moves first. Enthroned in Cusco with the backing of the capital's Panica lineages and the southern nobility, he commands the legitimacy of tradition. The Coricancha's priests recognize his claim. The Seca lines radiate from his seat of power. But legitimacy alone does not win wars, and Huasca's armies lack the hardened veterans who spent decades fighting in the northern forests under Huayna Capac's command. Those soldiers answer to Atahualpa. From Quito, Atahualpa dispatches his two finest generals southward. Chalcuchimac, a strategist of ruthless precision, and Quisquis, a field commander of relentless aggression, lead the northern armies down the spine of the Andes. The campaign unfolds across the full length of the empire, and its devastation is total. Storehouses that once fed millions are burned. Bridges braided from ichu grass over roaring gorges are cut. Tambos that sheltered chasqui runners stand empty and ransacked. The infrastructure Pachacuti and his successors spent 3 generations building is systematically dismantled as each side denies the other the logistical network that made Tawantinsuyu function. The battles are staggering in scale. Tens of thousands clash on highland plains and in narrow mountain passes. Huasca's forces win early engagements near Tomebamba, briefly pushing the northern armies back. But Chalcuchimac regroups and adapts. The northern veterans, seasoned by years of jungle warfare against the fierce peoples of Ecuador and southern Colombia, prove superior in discipline and tactical flexibility. They push south through the central highlands, winning engagement after engagement. The war tears through communities that had known decades of imperial peace. Islas that once contributed their labor to terrace construction and road maintenance now see their young men conscripted into armies fighting other Inca subjects. The vertical archipelago system collapses in contested regions as trade between ecological zones ceases. Fields go unplanted, irrigation channels fall into disrepair. The population, already weakened by the smallpox epidemic that killed Huayna Capac, suffers famine and displacement on a catastrophic scale. Calcuchimac and Quisquis advance methodically through the heartland. They cross the Apurimac, pushing into the sacred territory around Cusco itself. Huasca, growing desperate, leads his forces personally into battle near Cuemaca. It is a catastrophic miscalculation. The northern generals encircle his army, shatter its formations, and capture the Sapa Inca himself. Huasca is bound and humiliated, paraded before the troops he once commanded. His wives and supporters are massacred. Quisquis enters Cusco and conducts a purge of Huasca's Panaca, executing members of rival lineages to eliminate any future challenge to Atahualpa's rule. The empire that took 3 generations to build has consumed itself in approximately 5 years of fratricidal war. Tens of thousands lie dead. The administrative system is fractured. Provincial lords who once obeyed the Sapa Inca without question have watched 2 claimants destroy each other and begun calculating their own independence. Atahualpa himself never enters Cusco. Marching south from Quito to claim his victory, he pauses at Cajamarca, a highland city at roughly 2,700 meters elevation, to rest at the thermal baths outside town. His army spreads across the valley, 40,000 warriors by conservative estimates, perhaps as many as 80,000. Tents and encampments dot the hillsides. Smoke from cooking fires drifts across the green slopes. Atahualpa has won the greatest civil war in Andean history. He is days from entering Cusco as undisputed ruler of Tawantinsuyu. On the 15th of November, 1532, a column of 168 Spanish soldiers, 62 of them mounted on horses, arrives at the edge of the valley. They are led by Francisco Pizarro, a man from Extremadura who has spent years probing the Pacific coast. His men are exhausted, terrified by the vast encampment spread before them. They ride into the empty plaza of Cajamarca and find it silent, the surrounding buildings deserted. Pizarro positions his cavalry and infantry in the structures flanking the square. The cannons are wheeled into place. The trap is set in the heart of a city that belongs to the most powerful man in the Western Hemisphere, a ruler who does not yet know that the world he commands is already hours from its end. The morning of November 16th, 1532, breaks cold over Cajamarca. Mist clings to the valley floor, where tens of thousands of Inca warriors remain encamped, their cooking fires sending thin columns of smoke into the highland air. The plaza sits empty, scrubbed clean by wind, its trapezoidal walls enclosing a space large enough to hold several thousand people. Behind those walls, in the low stone buildings that frame the square on 3 sides, Spanish soldiers wait in silence. Horses stamp and snort in the confined darkness. Men grip sword hilts with sweating palms. The falconets, small cannons loaded with shot, point toward the open ground. Hours pass, the sun climbs, no procession appears. Pizarro sends a messenger to Atahualpa's camp, urging the Sapa Inca to come. The afternoon light begins to shift from white to gold before the first sounds reach the plaza. Drums, shell trumpets, the rhythmic chanting of hundreds of voices growing louder across the valley floor. The procession that enters Cajamarca is unlike anything the Spanish have ever witnessed. Attendants in checkered livery sweep the road ahead with their hands, clearing every pebble and straw from the path. Behind them come ranks of men wearing tunics of brilliant blue and gold, singing in unison. Then come dancers adorned with hammered silver discs that catch the failing light. And at the center of this river of humanity, raised above the crowd on a litter plated in gold and encrusted with parrot feathers of emerald and scarlet, sits Atahualpa. A collar of heavy emeralds rests against his chest. The borla, the crimson fringe of sovereignty, hangs across his forehead. He is carried on the shoulders of 80 lords dressed in rich blue tunics, and around him press thousands of attendants and retainers, filling the plaza and spilling into the streets beyond. They carry no weapons. This is a ceremonial entrance, a display of imperial magnificence designed to overawe the strange bearded visitors who have requested an audience. The Sapa Inca has 80,000 warriors camped in the valley. He has no reason to fear 168 foreigners. The Friar Vicente de Valverde approaches the litter. Through an interpreter, he delivers the requerimiento, a formal demand that Atahualpa accept Christianity and acknowledge the sovereignty of the Spanish crown. He extends a breviary or Bible. Atahualpa examines the object, holds it to his ear, and finding it silent, tosses it to the ground. Valverde retreats. Pizarro raises a white cloth. The falconets fire simultaneously. The sound, a thunderclap amplified by stone walls, is something no one in the plaza has ever heard. Iron and stone shot tears through the packed crowd. In the same instant, cavalry bursts from 3 concealed positions, armored horses crashing into a mass of unarmed people who have no frame of reference for mounted warfare. The horses alone are weapons of terror, animals unknown in the Americas, enormous, shrieking, their riders swinging steel blades from above. The killing is not a battle. It is a systematic slaughter compressed into approximately 2 hours of fading daylight. The Inca attendants, unarmed and trapped within the plaza walls, press against each other so densely that a section of wall collapses under the weight of bodies. Spanish cavalry pursues those who flee through the breach into the open plain beyond. Infantry moves through the plaza methodically. The chroniclers who later record this day estimate between 2,000 and 10,000 Inca dead. Not a single Spaniard is killed. Pizarro himself sustains the only Spanish injury, a cut to his hand received while personally seizing Atahualpa from his litter, as his own soldiers slash at the lords still struggling to hold the Sapa Inca aloft. When darkness falls over Cajamarca, the plaza is carpeted with the dead. Gold ornaments and feathered garments lie trampled in blood. The litter rests overturned, its gold plating dented. And in a stone room at the edge of the square, Atahualpa, the undisputed lord of 12 million people, the son of the sun, the ruler of the largest empire in the Western Hemisphere, sits in chains. The empire built by Pachacuti, expanded by Tupac Inca Yupanqui, and perfected by Huayna Capac has not yet fallen. Its roads still function, its storehouses remain full, its armies still stand in the field. But its center has been ripped away in a single evening, and the world that existed before the falconets fired will never be reassembled. The captive emperor does not beg. In the days following the massacre, Atahualpa occupies a stone room on the eastern edge of Cajamarca's plaza, guards posted at every entrance, and yet he carries himself with the composure of a man still seated on the throne of Tawantinsuyu. He observes his captors closely, learns the rules of chess, eats from gold vessels his attendants are still permitted to bring, and within weeks he makes an offer so staggering that even Pizarro, a man not easily astonished, pauses to absorb it. Atahualpa gestures to the walls of his prison room, a space measuring roughly 6.5 meters long by 5 meters wide, and promises to fill it once with gold to a red line drawn at approximately 2.5 meters high and twice over with silver. The room itself becomes the unit of measure, the container and the contract. Pizarro agrees. Runners depart along the Capac Ñan carrying the Sapa Incas command, and the empire responds. From the Coricancha in Cusco, priests strip 700 plates of hammered gold from the temple walls. Sacred vessels shaped like maize cobs, llamas, and human figures are wrapped in cloth and loaded onto the backs of llama caravans. From provincial capitals and highland shrines, gold and silver objects begin the long journey to Cajamarca. Fountains, ceremonial tumi knives, miniature figurines of exquisite craftsmanship, sheets of beaten metal that once caught the equatorial sun and scattered it across sanctuary floors. The treasure arrives in waves through the early months of 1533, each caravan adding to the growing heap inside the ransom room. The Spanish watch the room fill with a mixture of wonder and impatience. Some objects are centuries old, carrying the artistic traditions of Chimu goldsmiths, whose ancestors perfected lost wax casting and repousse techniques long before the Inca absorbed their kingdom. Others bear the austere geometric precision of imperial Inca metalwork. Every piece represents not merely material wealth, but accumulated sacred meaning, offerings to Inti, adornments for royal mummies, ritual objects connecting the living to the divine. None of it survives. 9 forges burn continuously in Cajamarca, melting masterworks into standardized ingots. Indian smiths, forced to destroy the creations of their own civilization, feed the furnaces day after day. By the time the process ends, an estimated 6,000 kilograms of gold and 12,000 kilograms of silver have been rendered into bullion. The royal fifth, 1/5 of all treasure owed to Charles V of Spain, is set aside for shipment across the Atlantic. The remainder is divided among Pizarro's men, with horsemen receiving roughly twice the share of foot soldiers. Atahualpa fulfills his promise. The room is filled, but the logic of conquest has already moved beyond the terms of any bargain. A living Sapa Inca remains dangerous, a rallying point for armies still intact in the field, a symbol around which resistance could crystallize. Rumors reach the Spanish camp that Inca generals are massing forces. Atahualpa's continued communication with his commanders, particularly the formidable Chalcuchimac and Quisquis, feeds Spanish anxiety. Pizarro's partner Diego de Almagro, arriving with reinforcements, argues that the emperor must die. A trial is assembled, grotesque in its theater. The charges include idolatry, polygamy, the murder of Huasca, who has indeed been killed on orders Atahualpa likely issued from captivity, and treason against the Spanish crown, a crown Atahualpa has never acknowledged. The verdict is predetermined. On the evening of July 26, 1533, Atahualpa is led into the plaza where his attendants died 8 months earlier. Offered the choice between burning at the stake and garroting, he accepts baptism, taking the name Francisco to avoid the flames. The garrote tightens. The son of Huayna Capac, the victor of the Civil War, the lord of 4 quarters, dies in a colonial plaza under a foreign god's absolution. His body is buried with partial Christian rites, then partially burned. The Inca attendants who witness the execution retrieve what remains and carry it toward Quito, though the final resting place remains unknown. The ransom room stands empty now, its red line still visible on the wall, a measure of everything that was promised, everything that was given, and everything that was taken regardless. The road south from Cajamarca stretches more than 1,000 kilometers through the spine of the Andes, and the Spanish column moves along it like a blade drawn slowly across skin. Pizarro departs in August of 1533, accompanied by his puppet appointee, a young prince named Tupac Hualpa, crowned as a compliant Sapa Inca to legitimize the march. But Tupac Hualpa sickens and dies before reaching the capital, likely poisoned, and the column presses on without even the pretense of Inca authority at its head. The Vilcanota Valley opens before them in terraces of green and gold, the stonework of Inca agriculture cascading down slopes with a precision that makes the approaching soldiers pause. Atahualpa's General Quisquis holds Cusco, and skirmishes flare along the route. But the Spanish find unexpected allies. Thousands of warriors from peoples subjugated by the Inca, Cañari, Chachapoya, Huanca, march alongside the conquistadors, seizing the chance to break free from Tawantinsuyu's grip. The empire's own subjects become instruments of its undoing. On November 15th, 1533, the column enters Cusco. The city spreads across the Huatanay Basin at 3,400 meters, its streets laid in the shape of a puma, its walls of dark andesite fitted with a perfection that no European city can match. The Spanish stare at masonry where no blade can slip between the joints, at water channels running clean beneath every street, at the ordered geometry of cancha compounds opening onto courtyards swept immaculate. Then the looting begins. The Coricancha, the golden enclosure, the holiest site in Tawantinsuyu, stands at the convergence of the Seke lines, its interior walls sheathed in plates of hammered gold that catch the morning sun and throw it back in sheets of light. 700 gold plates are pried from those walls. The golden sun disk that once illuminated the sanctuary is seized. In the temple garden, life-sized replicas of maize stalks, llamas, and flowers crafted from gold and silver are torn from the earth and carried to the smelters. The sacred objects of an entire civilization are reduced to standardized ingots, weighed and divided according to contract. Pizarro installs another son of Huayna Capac, the young Manco Inca, as the new puppet Sapa Inca. The choice seems shrewd. Manco had opposed Atahualpa during the Civil War and initially welcomes the Spanish as liberators from his brother's faction. He receives the royal fringe, the mascapaicha, and performs the rituals of coronation. But the power behind the fringe belongs entirely to foreign hands. Spanish encomenderos divide the city's population among themselves. Inca nobles watch as their palaces are requisitioned, their wives and sisters seized, their storehouses emptied. The colonial transformation of Cusco proceeds with methodical violence. The foundations of Inca temples prove too massive and too perfectly constructed to demolish, so the Spanish build directly on top of them. The walls of the Coricancha become the foundation of the church and convent of Santo Domingo, Christian architecture rising from the bones of the sun god's house. The great plaza of Jaucaipata, where the mummified ancestors of the royal Panacas once sat in ceremonial procession, is renamed and repurposed. Meanwhile, Pizarro turns his attention to the coast. The highland capital sits too remote, too high, too far from the sea routes that connect the conquest to Spain. On January 18, 1535, he founds the Ciudad de los Reyes, the City of Kings, on the banks of the Rimac River near the Pacific shore. The city the world will know as Lima becomes the new colonial capital, and the political center of the Andes shifts from 3,400 meters to sea level, from sacred Puma to colonial grid. In Cusco, Manco Inca performs the ceremonies expected of him, wears the royal fringe, and watches. The humiliations accumulate, his property confiscated, his person mocked, his authority hollow. The puppet begins to understand that no amount of cooperation will restore what has been taken. The sacred city stands intact in its stonework, but emptied of its meaning, its gold melted, its temples crowned with crosses, its Psyche lines severed from the rituals that once gave them power. The puma-shaped city endures, but something fundamental has been extracted from it, something no ransom room could ever measure or return. But before the gold was stripped and the crosses raised, before the civil war and the plague, Tawantinsuyu functioned as the most precisely organized society in the pre-Columbian world. To understand what was lost, one must return to the empire at its height and descend from the level of emperors to the level of soil. The foundation is the elu. Every person in Tawantinsuyu belongs to one, an extended kinship group, bound by shared ancestry, shared land, and shared obligation. The elu is not a village, though it may occupy one. It is a web of reciprocal duty stretching across generations. Land belongs not to individuals, but to the community, and each year the curaka, the local leader, redistributes plots according to family size. A newlywed couple receives a tupu of land. A child born adds another allocation. The earth itself is understood as a living entity, Pachamama, and the relationship between people and soil is not ownership, but conversation. The fields climb the mountainsides in terraces, andines, that transform steep slopes into stepped gardens. On a single mountainside, temperature drops roughly 1 degree for every 200 meters of elevation gained. The Inca exploit this gradient deliberately. Maize grows on the warmer lower terraces. Potatoes, over 700 varieties, from purple to yellow to frost-resistant bitter cultivars, thrive higher. Quinoa occupies the margins. This is the vertical archipelago strategy. A single elu may cultivate plots at the valley floor, on the mid-slope terraces, and in the high puna grasslands, accessing every ecological zone the Andes offer. Some Alis maintain satellite communities days away on the coastal desert or the Amazonian fringe, harvesting cotton, coca, chili peppers, and tropical fruits. Nothing in this system operates through currency. There are no markets in the familiar sense. Instead, the state collects labor. The mita requires every able-bodied household member to contribute a rotational period of work, building roads, farming state lands, serving in armies, weaving cloth, or carrying goods along the Capac Ñan. In return, the state feeds, clothes, and shelters mita workers and redistributes surpluses through a network of kulka storehouses. These stone structures, built into hillsides with ventilation channels to regulate airflow, hold freeze-dried chuño potatoes, charqui-dried llama meat, maize, quinoa, sandals, weapons, and woven cloth. At Cotopaxi near Cochabamba, over 2,000 kolka once stood in orderly rows, enough to supply entire armies on campaign. The administration tracking all of this uses no written script. Instead, the Quipucamayok, the keeper of the Quipu, reads meaning from knotted cords. A quipu consists of a primary horizontal cord from which pendant strings hang, each dyed in specific colors, each bearing knots tied at precise intervals. The knots encode numbers in a base 10 system. Color and cord position indicate category, census data, tribute tallies, herd counts, agricultural yields. Some scholars believe certain quipus encode narrative information, though this remains debated. Approximately 3,000 quipus survive today in museums worldwide, silent testimony to an accounting system that governed 12 million people without a single written word. Women spin thread while walking between fields, the drop spindle turning constantly. On backstrap looms, tensioned between a post and the weaver's own body, they produce cloth of astonishing fineness. Kumbi tapestry, woven from vicuña fiber with a diameter of roughly 12 micrometers, finer than cashmere, is reserved for royalty and sacred offerings. Coarser Ahuasca cloth serves daily needs. Textiles carry more cultural weight than gold in Tawantinsuyu. They are burned as offerings, buried with the dead, exchanged in diplomatic ceremonies, and draped over huacas. The empire runs on thread as much as stone. Every third row of terraces belongs to Inti. Every third belongs to the state. The remainder feeds the Elu. This tripartite division replicates itself at every scale, from a single hillside to the 4 suyus of the empire. The system is neither free nor brutal. It is total. Every person has a place. Every place has a purpose, and the knotted cords remember it all. The sacred lives at the center of everything. In the heart of Cusco, where the Seca lines converge like threads drawn taut from a single spindle, the Coricancha stands as the spiritual axis of Tawantinsuyu. Its walls of perfectly fitted andesite rise in smooth, dark courses, and upon them sheets of hammered gold catch the equatorial sun. Inside the principal chamber, a massive golden disk, the image of Inti, the sun god, blazes from the western wall, positioned so that the first light of the June solstice strikes its surface and floods the interior with reflected fire. Flanking it, silver panels represent Mama Killa, the moon. The floor is said to be strewn with gold dust. But the most extraordinary space lies beyond the inner sanctum. A garden fills the Coricancha's courtyard, not a garden of living things, but of metal replicas so finely wrought they seem to breathe. Stalks of maize rendered in gold and silver rise from the earth, their leaves and tassels perfectly articulated. Gold llamas stand among gold shepherds. Silver butterflies rest on golden flowers. This is not mere decoration. It is a theological statement. The entire natural world belongs to Inti, and the Coricancha contains its perfected reflection. The Sapa Inca is Inti's living son. His authority is not political alone, it is cosmic. Above Inti stands Viracocha, the creator who shaped the world and set the sun and moon in motion before walking west across the Pacific and vanishing. Viracocha is honored but distant. Inti is immediate, demanding, present in every sunrise, every harvest, every military victory attributed to his favor. Radiating outward from the Coricancha, 41 sequoia lines organize the sacred landscape into a vast cosmological map. Along these invisible corridors, more than 300 huacas mark points of spiritual power. A spring where an ancestor bathed, a boulder shaped like a sleeping puma, a cave from which the first people emerged. Each huaca belongs to a specific ailu responsible for its maintenance and ritual feeding. Offerings of coca leaves, chicha beer, spondylus shell, and llama fat sustain the relationship between the human and the sacred. The calendar itself is devotional. At the June solstice, the festival of Inti draws the empire's nobility to Cusco. Priests kindle new fire with a concave golden mirror, focusing sunlight onto cotton tinder. Llamas are sacrificed, their entrails red for omens. Chicha flows in rivers. The ceremony reaffirms the bond between the Sapa Inca and his divine father, renewing the cosmic order for another year. Yet the most solemn rite is the Capacocha. When the empire faces crisis, the death of a Sapa Inca, an earthquake, a famine, specially chosen children are selected from across Tawantinsuyu for their physical perfection. They travel to Cusco, where they are honored and feasted, then dispatched to the highest peaks of the Andes. There, above the clouds, at altitudes exceeding 5,000 meters, they are given chicha until they sleep, and they do not wake. Their bodies, wrapped in the finest Kumbi textiles and accompanied by gold and silver figurines, become permanent offerings binding the mountain gods to the empire. The cold and aridity of these summits preserve what time would otherwise erase. On Mount Ampato, at 6,310 meters, the frozen remains of a girl approximately 12 to 14 years old are discovered in 1995, her textiles still vivid, her face still composed. She is called Juanita. 4 years later, on the summit of Lulaelaco at 6,739 meters, the highest archaeological site on Earth, 3 children are found. A girl of approximately 15, a boy of 7, a girl of 6. Their preservation is so extraordinary that DNA analysis remains possible 5 centuries after their deaths. These are not acts of cruelty rendered in modern judgment. They are acts of ultimate consecration within a system where the mountains are alive, the sun is a father, and the boundary between the human and the divine is maintained through reciprocity, aini, the eternal exchange of obligation and grace. Every offering at a roadside huaca, every drop of chicha poured onto the earth, every golden maize stalk planted in the Coricancha's garden participates in this same logic. The sacred is not separate from governance, agriculture, or war. It is the architecture beneath all of them, the invisible foundation upon which every knotted cord and fitted stone ultimately rests. That invisible foundation manifests in material form through the hands of Tawantinsuyu's artisans, whose mastery of fiber, stone, and metal produces objects of such refinement that they stand among the highest achievements of the pre-Columbian world. The textile begins with the animal. High on the Puna grasslands above 4,000 meters, herds of vicuña move through the thin air, their coats producing fiber measuring just 12 micrometers in diameter, finer than cashmere, softer than silk. The Aclahuasi, the houses of chosen women in every provincial capital and in Cusco itself, shelter the empire's most skilled weavers. Their fingers work backstrap looms with a tension controlled by the body's own weight, interlocking warp and weft threads into Kumbi cloth, so dense that thread counts reach 300 per centimeter. The resulting fabric carries geometric patterns encoding identity. Tokapu motifs in precise squares communicate rank, origin, and possibly narrative meaning that scholars still labor to decode. Dyes drawn from cochineal insects produce deep crimson. Indigo yields blue. The root of the relbunium plant gives orange. A single royal garment may require months of continuous labor, and the Sapa Inca wears each Cambi tunic only once before it is ceremonially burned. Featherwork overlays transform cloth into iridescent surfaces, with the breast feathers of tropical birds, scarlet macaws, blue and yellow macaws, Amazonian tanagers, individually knotted onto cotton backing in mosaics of staggering chromatic precision. Stone speaks a different language. Along Hatunrumiok Street in Cusco, a single block of green diorite sits within a wall of the palace, attributed to Inca Roca. It has 12 angles, each edge meeting its neighbor with a precision that permits no blade, no sheet of paper, no breath of light between the joints. No mortar binds these walls. The stones hold themselves through gravity, geometry, and a fitting technique involving patient abrasion, workers grinding surfaces with sand and water until the contact is absolute. At Sacsayhuamán, individual blocks weigh over 100 tons. At Ollantaytambo, 6 monolithic rhyolite slabs stand at the summit, transported from quarries across the Urubamba Valley, using ramps, levers, and the coordinated labor of thousands. Earthquakes that flatten colonial churches leave Inca foundations unmoved. Metal answers to fire. Goldsmiths inherited from the conquered Chimu work sheets of gold so thin they ripple in the wind, hammering them over wooden forms to create ceremonial tumi knives with crescent blades and elaborate figural handles. Silversmiths cast miniature llama figurines for capacocha offerings. Bronze, alloyed from copper and tin sourced from the Bolivian Altiplano, provides tools, chisels, and agricultural implements harder than pure copper alone. Platinum, found in river gravels of the northern provinces, is worked through a sintering technique combining heat and hammering that European metallurgists will not master for centuries. The earth itself becomes a laboratory. At More, northwest of Cusco, concentric circular terraces descend into natural sinkholes like vast amphitheaters carved into the plateau. The temperature difference between the highest and lowest terrace reaches 15 degrees, creating distinct microclimatic zones within a single site. Evidence suggests systematic agricultural experimentation, testing which crops thrive at which altitudes, refining the varieties that feed an empire cultivating over 700 types of potato alone. At Tipon, south of Cusco, water descends through a sequence of fountains and channels with such hydraulic precision that flow rates remain constant across multiple levels, the stonework calibrated to control velocity and distribution with an elegance that modern engineers study with admiration. Every thread, every fitted stone, every hammered gold sheet participates in the same governing logic. Nothing exists for decoration alone. The textile declares political order. The wall resists seismic destruction. The terrace multiplies food production. The fountain distributes water equitably. Art and engineering are not separate categories in Tawantinsuyu. They are a single discipline expressed in different materials, serving a single imperial vision in which beauty and function are indistinguishable, and the hand of the maker is always in service to the architecture of the whole. That single imperial vision shatters in the spring of 1536, when the puppet emperor breaks free of his handlers and turns the empire's own machinery of war against its conquerors. Manco Inca has endured months of systematic degradation. The brothers Gonzalo and Juan Pizarro have seized his wives, looted his household, chained him in public. When he finally slips out of Cusco in April of 1536, under the pretext of retrieving a golden statue for the Spanish, he vanishes into the highlands and does not return. Within weeks, the call to arms radiates outward along the Capac Ñan. Warriors stream down from every quarter of Tawantinsuyu. By early May, an army estimated between 100,000 and 200,000 men encircles the city that was once the navel of the world. Cusco burns. Manco's slingers heat stones in bonfires until they glow, then launch them in arcing volleys onto the thatched roofs of the colonial city. Entire blocks erupt in flame. Smoke blackens the sky above the Huatanay Valley. The roughly 190 Spaniards and their indigenous auxiliaries are pinned in 2 buildings near the central plaza, fighting fires as fast as they spread, unable to deploy cavalry in the narrow streets choked with rubble and ash. The siege tightens. Water channels are diverted. Supply lines are severed. For weeks, the defenders survive on dwindling stores while the hills around Cusco blaze with the campfires of Manco's forces, stretching to the horizon in every direction. The turning point comes at Sacsayhuamán. The great fortress crowning the hill above Cusco has been seized by Manco's warriors, and from its zigzag terraces they rain stones and arrows down on the city below. Juan Pizarro leads a desperate cavalry charge up the slopes in May of 1536. The fighting is ferocious. Juan Pizarro himself takes a stone to the head during the assault and dies of his wounds days later. But the Spanish, armored in steel and mounted on war horses, the Inca have no effective counter against in open terrain, breach the outer walls. The battle for the fortress rages through the night. Inca commanders hold the central tower until they are overwhelmed. By dawn, the terraces of Sacsayhuamán are strewn with the dead, and the fortress passes back into Spanish hands. The loss of Sacsayhuamán does not end the siege. Manco's forces continue to surround Cusco through the rainy season and into 1537, launching periodic assaults, burning crops, and cutting off relief columns. Simultaneously, a second Inca army under the general Quizu Yupanqui marches on Lima, reaching the outskirts of the coastal capital in August of 1536. But Lima sits on flat ground, and on the open plain the Spanish cavalry proves devastating. Quizu Yupanqui falls in the fighting, and the siege of Lima collapses. Relief columns from Lima finally fight their way through to Cusco. The agricultural calendar works against Manco as well. His warriors, drawn from farming communities across the empire, must return to plant their fields or face famine. The vast army begins to dissolve. By the spring of 1537, Manco Inca recognizes that he cannot retake Cusco by force. He withdraws his remaining forces northwest, descending from the highland passes into the cloud forests of the Vilcabamba range. There, in a remote valley accessible only through narrow mountain trails shrouded in perpetual mist, Manco establishes a new capital. Vilcabamba rises in the jungle at roughly 1,000 meters elevation, surrounded by steep ridges and dense vegetation that render cavalry useless and Spanish firearms unreliable in the damp air. It is not Cusco. It lacks the polygonal masonry, the golden temples, the geometric perfection of the imperial capital. But it is free. Manco Inca rules here as Sapa Inca in exile, maintaining the rituals, the court protocols, the claim to divine sovereignty that the conquest has not extinguished. The Neo-Inca state of Vilcabamba will endure for 35 years, a kingdom in the clouds, defiant and unbroken. the last ember of Tawantinsuyu, burning in the green darkness of the forest. That ember burns for 7 years under Manco Inca's direct rule. In the humid lowlands northwest of Cusco, the exiled Sapa Inca maintains a court that mirrors, in diminished form, the rituals of the imperial capital. Priests tend sacred objects smuggled from the Coricancha. The mummies of royal ancestors receive offerings of chicha and coca. Manco launches periodic raids against Spanish supply lines, ambushing travelers on the roads between Cusco and Lima, reminding the colonial authorities that Tawantinsuyu has not surrendered. But the jungle kingdom harbors a fatal vulnerability. Around 1544, a group of Spanish fugitives, supporters of the defeated Almagrist faction in the civil wars among the conquistadors, take refuge in Vilcabamba under Manco's protection. These men, enemies of Pizarro's followers, seem like natural allies. They are not. During a game of horseshoes, the refugees turn on their host and assassinate Manco Inca. His attendants kill the Spaniards in turn, but the damage is irreversible. The Sapa Inca who defied an empire lies dead at the hands of men he sheltered. Manco's young son Sayri Tupac inherits the throne of Vilcabamba as a child, and regents govern in his name through years of uneasy stalemate. The Spanish colonial administration, now firmly established in Lima under a succession of viceroys, alternates between military pressure and diplomatic overtures. In 1558, Sayri Tupac accepts a negotiated surrender, leaves Vilcabamba, converts to Christianity, and receives estates in the Yucay Valley near Cusco. He dies within 2 years under circumstances that arouse suspicion among the Inca nobility. Power in Vilcabamba passes to Titu Cusi Yupanqui, another of Manco's sons, who proves the most politically sophisticated of the jungle rulers. Titu Cusi plays a double game with remarkable skill. He negotiates with Spanish envoys, signs the Treaty of Acobamba in 1566, and permits Augustinian missionaries to enter Vilcabamba and establish a small church. He even dictates a remarkable document, an account of the conquest from the Inca perspective, transcribed by the friar Marcos Garcia. Yet behind this diplomatic facade, Titu Cusi maintains the old religious ceremonies, supports the priests of Inti, and never fully submits to colonial authority. The missionaries grow frustrated. The negotiations stall and restart and stall again. Then in 1571, Titu Cusi falls suddenly ill and dies. The Augustinian friars attempt to save him with European medicines, and when he perishes, the Inca priests blame the foreigners. The missionaries are killed. Into this crisis steps the youngest brother, Tupac Amaru, barely out of adolescence, with no experience of diplomacy or war. He is crowned Sapa Inca in Vilcabamba and immediately expels all remaining Spanish contacts, sealing the jungle kingdom shut. This act of defiance reaches Lima at precisely the wrong moment. Viceroy Francisco de Toledo, the most ruthlessly efficient administrator Spain has yet sent to Peru, is already engaged in a systematic campaign to dismantle every remaining structure of Inca authority. Toledo views Vilcabamba not as a minor irritant, but as a symbol of resistance that legitimizes indigenous defiance across the entire viceroyalty. In April of 1572, he dispatches a military expedition of approximately 250 Spanish soldiers and several thousand indigenous auxiliaries into the jungle. The campaign is brutal and swift. Spanish forces hack through cloud forest along narrow trails where the vegetation closes overhead like a green tunnel. They ford swollen rivers and climb ridges slick with rain. Vilcabamba's defenders fight from prepared positions but cannot hold against sustained assault. In June of 1572, the Spanish enter Vilcabamba to find it burning. The Inca have set fire to their own capital rather than surrender it intact. Tupac Amaru flees deeper into the forest with a small retinue, moving east toward the lowland jungle. Spanish pursuit parties follow the trail for days through increasingly dense vegetation. They finally overtake the young Sapa Inca at the Masahuay River, where he is captured along with his pregnant wife and the golden image of Punchao, the sun idol that has accompanied the Inca rulers since the fall of Cusco. The last sovereign of Tawantinsuyu is bound and led back through the mountains toward the city his ancestors built in the shape of a puma, a prisoner walking the roads his great-grandfather's engineers laid across the sky. The prisoner arrives in Cusco under heavy guard in the final days of September 1572. The city his ancestors rebuilt in the shape of a puma now wears a colonial mask. Spanish balconies jutting from walls of Inca polygonal stone, church bell towers rising where once the standards of Tawantinsuyu caught the mountain wind. Tupac Amaru is paraded through streets lined with tens of thousands of indigenous people who have gathered from across the former empire, drawn by rumor and dread. His hair is shorn. A chain loops around his neck. Behind him walks the captured golden image of Punchao, the solar idol that once radiated from the Coricancha and then from the jungle court of Vilcabamba, now reduced to war plunder destined for the Spanish crown. Viceroy Francisco de Toledo has already determined the outcome. A trial is convened, swift and ceremonial in its inevitability. The charges include rebellion, idolatry, and the alleged murder of Spanish missionaries. Clergy protest. Several prominent Spaniards petition for mercy, arguing that executing a sovereign prince will stain the crown's honor. The Bishop of Cusco reportedly kneels before Toledo, begging him to send the prisoner to Spain for judgment by the king. Toledo refuses. The sentence is death. On September 24, 1572, a scaffold stands in the great plaza of Cusco, the Huacaypata, the same ceremonial heart where Inca emperors once presided over Inti and where the mummified bodies of deceased Sapa Incas were brought out to receive offerings of chicha and reverence. Now the plaza is ringed by colonial architecture and choked with humanity. Estimates suggest that tens of thousands fill the square and spill onto the surrounding hillsides, a sea of grief pressing against Spanish cordons. Tupac Amaru is led to the scaffold. The accounts describe a moment of extraordinary silence falling over the multitude as he raises his hand. Then the executioner strikes. A sound rises from the assembled thousands, a collective wail so vast and sustained that Spanish chroniclers record it with evident unease, a sound that seems to carry the weight of an entire civilization's ending. With that single act, the royal line of Vilcabamba is extinguished. The last sovereign link to Manco Capac, to the mythic emergence from Pacaritambo, to the divine solar lineage that legitimized 3 centuries of Inca rule, is severed on a wooden platform in a colonized plaza. Toledo moves swiftly to ensure no resurrection. He orders the systematic destruction of the royal mummies, the preserved ancestors of each Panica, the royal descent groups, who had been maintained as living presences in Inca society, consulted, fed, carried in procession. These sacred bundles are gathered and burned. Centuries of ancestral memory, encoded in textile wrappings and desiccated flesh, reduced to ash. The golden image of Punchao is dismantled and shipped to Spain, where it vanishes from the historical record. The Viceroy's campaign extends beyond symbols. Toledo implements the reduction program with renewed force, uprooting indigenous communities from their scattered highland settlements and concentrating them into planned colonial towns built on a Spanish grid pattern around a central church and plaza. The Ilu structure fractures under this forced reorganization. Sacred huasas are demolished or buried beneath chapels. Inca ceremonies are driven underground. The quipu, already viewed with suspicion by colonial authorities, falls into official disuse as Spanish administrative records replace the knotted cords. The Capacnan, that magnificent arterial system of over 30,000 kilometers, begins its slow deterioration. Without the Mita labor that maintained its bridges, stairways, and drainage channels, sections crumble into the ravines they once spanned. Tambos stand empty. Colca storehouses rot. The infrastructure of an empire designed for perpetual maintenance dissolves in the absence of the state that sustained it. Yet Toledo's triumph is incomplete. The wail that rose from the Huacay Pata does not fade. It passes into oral tradition, into Quechua songs sung in highland villages far from Spanish ears, into textile patterns that encode forbidden meanings, into the quiet persistence of offerings left at mountain huacas under cover of darkness. The memory of Tawantinsuyu does not die with its last emperor. It descends into the soil of the Andes like a seed buried beneath stone, waiting for the centuries to crack open the earth above it. 2 centuries pass beneath colonial rule, and the seed germinates. In 1780, a mestizo curaca named José Gabriel Condorcanqui, who traces his lineage directly to Tupac Amaru I, adopts the name of his executed ancestor. Tupac Amaru II raises the banner of rebellion across the southern highlands, rallying tens of thousands of indigenous and mestizo followers from Tinta to the shores of Lake Titicaca. His forces besiege Spanish garrisons, disrupt silver shipments, and for a brief, incandescent moment, threaten the colonial order itself. The rebellion becomes the largest indigenous uprising in the history of the Americas. Spanish authorities crush it with overwhelming force. In May of 1781, Tupac Amaru II is executed in the same plaza where his ancestor died, his body torn apart by horses before the same weeping multitudes. The colonial government bans Quechua texts, Inca royal insignia, and even the word Inca from public use. Yet the prohibition proves that the memory still carries revolutionary force. Quechua refuses to die. Across highland villages from Colombia to Argentina, the language of Tawantinsuyu persists in lullabies, agricultural songs, and the daily commerce of market squares. Today, 8 to 10 million speakers carry it forward, making it the most widely spoken indigenous language in the Americas. Inca agricultural terraces remain under active cultivation in the Sacred Valley and across the Altiplano, their drainage systems still functioning after 5 centuries. The concentric rings of morae still demonstrate temperature gradients that modern agronomists study with admiration. Every June, in the province of Canas above the Apurimac Gorge, 4 communities gather to rebuild the Cieshuachaca Bridge. Braided from ichu grass in a tradition unbroken for centuries, the suspension bridge is completed in 3 days of communal labor that mirrors the Mita system of the empire itself. The finished bridge sways above the canyon, a living artifact of Inca engineering renewed by hands that remember what no written document recorded. In July of 1911, an American historian named Hiram Bingham climbs a steep ridge above the Urubamba River, guided by a local farmer named Melchor Arteaga. The terraces and granite walls that emerge from the cloud forest have never been lost to the families farming nearby, but Bingham's photographs introduce Machu Picchu to the wider world. The site becomes the most recognized symbol of Inca achievement, its Intihuatana stone and Temple of the Sun drawing over 1 million visitors annually. In 1983, the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization declares the city of Cusco a World Heritage Site. The polygonal walls of Hatunrumiok, the curved foundation of the Coricancha beneath the church of Santo Domingo, the red-walled streets where colonial plaster peels away to reveal Inca stonework beneath, all receive formal recognition as treasures of human civilization. In 2014, the Chapac-Ñan road system earns the same designation, honoring over 30,000 kilometers of pathways that once bound a continent together. Each June 24th, the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere, the festival of Inti Raymi fills the esplanade of Sacsayhuamán with thousands of participants and spectators. Performers in woven garments of crimson and gold reenact the ceremonies that Pachacuti codified 5 centuries earlier. The sun strikes the ancient walls at the same angle it always has. The language spoken is Quechua. The offerings are coca and chicha. The mountains, Ausangate, Salcante, still hold their snow, still receive their prayers. The Inca Empire endured for less than a century at its full extent. Its legacy has endured for 500 years and continues to grow. In every terrace still under cultivation, every bridge rebuilt by communal hands, every Quechua word spoken in a highland market at dawn, the children of the sun persist. Tawantinsuyu did not vanish. It transformed, adapted, and waited, as it always had, in the patient stone and living memory of the Andes. Thank you for joining this journey through the complete history of the Inca civilization. If these stories of the ancient world have moved or inspired you, consider subscribing so you never miss the next expedition into the past.